The southern polar base, isolated at the edge of the world, received news that caused more of a stir than usual. For the first time, a woman would be deployed as an operational soldier on an active mission in Antarctica. Her name, Lieutenant Alice Duarte, 29 years old with an impeccable record. He specialized in extreme survival, strategic intelligence, and tactical engineering. Her respectable resume, but one that few took seriously in that environment dominated by veteran and skeptical men. Alice's arrival was silent, without speeches or celebrations, but as soon as she crossed the base hangar with her compact suitcase and firm posture, the whispers began. "This isn't a military parade, it's survival," grumbled one of the officers. "Did you bring a hairdryer?" a sergeant teased, drawing muffled laughter. "First to freeze." "Wanna bet how much?" joked another dismissively. Alice didn't react. She didn't ask for respect, she didn't respond, she just listened and watched. With rigid discipline, she carried out every order without hesitation, as if each task were part of a silent code known only to her. While the other soldiers saw her as an outlier, she began to understand the base's true patterns, unspoken flaws, subtle negligence, and above all, the arrogance that precedes tragedy. In the early days, they isolated her from the planning groups. They assigned her to outside patrols as if she were expendable or disposable. When she suggested reinforcing thermal camera protocols, her words were heard as background noise. She was seen as a symbol, not a solution. But what no one imagined was that silent, discredited, and left-aside woman would soon be the only one capable of keeping everyone alive when the true danger emerged from the white silence of the ice. Leave your like right now. If subscribe to the channel and activate the bell, because what Alice will face next is not just a test of courage, it is a warning about how we treat those we deem weak. In the next chapter, the alarm rings, and the real test begins. Antarctica was already a hostile place in itself, biting winds, absolute silence, nights that lasted weeks, and the constant feeling that the world had forgotten you. But for Lieutenant Alice Duarte, the cold didn't just come from the weather. The contempt was constant, silent, and slowly began to freeze what hope she still had. She noticed from day one, the base commander didn't even look her in the eye during the initial meeting. While presenting the training schedule and safety protocols, he spoke directly to the other officers, as if Alice were merely a shadow. In the duty roster, her name never appeared in the central functions. No logistical operations, no tactical support, no group simulations. Instead, she was left with tasks usually delegated to trainees, maintaining climate sensors, inspecting external seals, organizing technical inventories. "You can handle this, Duarte. You need some fresh air, don't you?" one of the supervisors said, tossing the folder of assignments onto the desk without even looking up. The other soldiers avoided engaging her in conversation. In the mess hall, the benches around her were always empty. The jokes were whispered, but enough for her to hear. "Is she here to parade on the ice or to work? First storm and she'll ask to leave." Alice endured, silently, but not submissive. One afternoon, during a brief break between tasks, she entered the base's old control center, a little used room where old reports and maps were stored. It was there that she found the complete structural plan of Ilara 9, including areas that hadn't been accessed since the 1980s. She began studying it, line by line. Nothing escaped her notice. She checked the functioning of the exhaust filters, the condensation levels, the ventilation ducts, and something began to catch her attention. Small variations in the radiation levels of the auxiliary reactor. It wasn't alarming, but it was constant, almost imperceptible. Like a whisper no one wants to hear. He gathered the data and decided to take it to the security officer, a man with a thick mustache and a cynical look. "Lieutenant Duarte, do you mean to tell me you found a problem with the reactor's containment system? All by yourself?" he said mockingly, raising an eyebrow. "Yes, sir. There is a pattern in the emission peaks, always in the early morning hours, and the Line B filters are misaligned with the original design standards. This may indicate progressive failure." His response came in bursts of laughter. "Have you been reading too many of those disaster magazines, Duarte? This isn't science fiction. It's a military base. We know what we're doing." She took a deep breath. She knew that persisting would only reinforce the stigma she already carried. She returned to the external sensors, her punishment zone, And there, amid 60-kilometer-h winds and near-zero visibility, she continued investigating. She took detailed notes, updated records that had been ignored for months, and cross-referenced the data with old reports. She discovered that 12 years ago, there had been a similar failure at a sister base, Ilara 4, and that the problem had started exactly the same way, with small deviations in the containment filters. But back then, no one paid attention. By the time the failure was noticed, it was too late. A partial collapse contaminated 2 sectors, and the evacuation led to the loss of equipment and lives. But who would hear that from an isolated, discredited woman sent on a mission just to fulfill political quotas? During a strategy meeting, from which she was obviously excluded, Alice heard laughter and the sound of clinking glasses from afar. There was a general sense of calm among the officers, as if nothing could touch them, as if they were above risk. That night, Alice didn't sleep. She analyzed the pressure changes in the tanks, drew up a proposal for strengthening the containment, printed 3 copies, and slipped them into her superior's lockers without signing. The next day, the copies were found crumpled in the trash. The contempt was no longer just social, it was institutional, and more than that, it was dangerous. And then came the most piercing silence. Every day the base felt more strange, as if the ice itself was trying to alert them. Leaks that hadn't been there before, subtle vibrations in the metal floor, tiny shocks in the access panels. Alice was connecting the pieces. She saw what no one wanted to see, and deep down, something inside her was growing, a dark certainty that when all else failed, there would be nowhere to run. And maybe the only escape plan was hers. Have you ever experienced or witnessed a situation where someone was ignored, even though they were right all along? Share in the comments. We want to hear your story. If this story has you hooked, just imagine what's yet to come. The ice is talking and Alice is listening. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell to follow the next part of this story. The moment of collapse is closer than it seems. 2:47 a.m. The entire base was silent when a shrill alarm pierced the darkness like a sharp blade. The sound was metallic, constant, and invasive. Within seconds, the main control panel was filled with urgently pulsing red lights. The message was clear. A radioactive leak had been detected. The western sector was collapsing. Sensors began to fail, one after another. Readings became unstable. The power system fluctuated, plunging parts of the base into intermittent blackouts. Lights flickered as if begging for help. The temperature fluctuated inexplicably, sometimes dropping sharply, sometimes rising as if the base's core itself were losing control. Internal communications stopped working. Radios emitted only static, and no one could contact the outside world. The commander, still in his pajamas, stood paralyzed before the panel, his eyes fixed on the blinking screen. He didn't say a word. His years of training hadn't prepared him for this. He no longer commanded. He simply observed. The chief engineer disappeared. Some claimed to have seen him running toward the ventilation system. Others said he'd lost his mind, but no one knew for sure. What was known was that no one was taking control. Panic swept through the base like a silent avalanche. A sergeant tried to organize the soldiers for evacuation, but order was lost amid the chaos. Screams, falls, smoke, contradictory orders, fear. Some tried to run to the underground shelter, but the steel door had jammed. The security system was unresponsive. Others tried to manually restart the ventilation, but the mechanism was frozen. White vapor rose from the floor, creating a dense fog in the corridors. It was as if the cold had gained consciousness. Rachel, the cook, watched from the mess hall. She saw the floor slowly crack. The fissure was growing like a raw wound in the concrete. A metallic smell permeated the room. Something was very wrong. She remembered a forgotten tunnel that appeared on an old map of the base, hanging on the kitchen wall. Maybe it would be useful now. But who would listen to a cook? No one was looking at her. In the maintenance bay, Novak, a technical operator, was trying to access the emergency panel. The lights there were also failing. A low sound echoed from the internal structures, as if something was pulsing beneath the base's floor. He muttered, almost voicelessly, that the core was unstable. And he realized he was talking to himself. In the barracks, soldiers stumbled as they tried to get dressed. Some were already nauseous, affected by radiation exposure. Others carried fellow soldiers injured by falls caused by the shaking of the structure. One of the rooms caught fire. A short circuit blew out part of the electrical network, and dark smoke began to billow. In the biocontrol lab, containment pods vibrated. The test animals made sounds of distress. A scientist tried to access the security levels, but the system crashed. Radiation had reached even the most protected compartments. The screams changed in tone, from fear to hysteria. One soldier claimed to have seen a shadow cross the corridor. He said something was waking up. Others refused to listen. It was too late to rationalize anything. The base, built to withstand the impossible, now felt like a trap. The corridors had become dead-end tunnels. Deep cracking sounds came from the walls, as if the ice were crushing the structure from within. In the control room, the commander repeated the same words, as if trying to convince himself. That wasn't in the protocols. That wasn't in the protocols. The hangar's main door froze solid. The ice was too thick, solid, impenetrable. They tried using blowtorches, but the gas had run out. There was no way out. Time inside the base vanished. Minutes felt like hours. The air pressure changed abruptly. The wind chill went from -60 degrees to almost 12 degrees in a matter of seconds. At the telecommunications center, a single transmission was recorded before the system went down completely. Ilara 9 base, active leak, loss of control, evacuation request, code red, code red. I repeat, code red. After that, just silence. Have you ever imagined yourself trapped in a place where everything fails at once? Command, technology, protection, and trust. Where the only certainty is that no one will come to rescue you. Leave a comment. What would you do if you were inside the base when the alarm sounded? Like, subscribe, and get ready, because in the next video, what they found in the tunnels could change everything. Smoke still permeated the base's narrow corridors when Alice emerged, eyes steady, the facility's blueprint in hand. The emergency siren continued to echo through the metal pipes, a persistent reminder of the chaos that had engulfed the place. Officers ran in every direction, issuing conflicting orders, while the commander, pale and disoriented, barely managed to maintain his composure. It was at that moment that Alice's voice burst forth, cutting through the noise like a blade. There's an evacuation route through the thermal containment tunnel. No one else knows about it, but I've studied it, she shouted, holding up the map as if revealing a long-buried secret. For a brief moment, the room froze. Everyone stared at her, some with disbelief, others with a hint of hope. Coach Novak, one of the few who had respected her from the start, approached. "Are you sure about this?" She responded with a firm nod and began moving with determined steps toward the west sector. The route she mentioned had been deactivated in old reports. It was considered unstable, forgotten during training, but Alice hadn't forgotten. She'd spent sleepless nights studying every blueprint of the base, every forgotten route, every record of the old engineers. While others slept or laughed at her, she memorized codes, routes, and protocols. The group followed her, still reluctant. The corridors were partially collapsed. The power wavered. The internal temperature had already dropped sharply. Portable flashlights flickered, while the sound of structures collapsing echoed off the walls. Alice, in front, gave instructions. She ordered valves to be closed, ducts to be isolated, and areas of instability to be avoided. At one point, a secondary explosion knocked out part of a containment panel. She threw herself at a soldier who was about to be hit, shielding him with her own body. She was wounded in the arm. Burns began to appear on the side of her shoulder, but she didn't stop. She got up and kept going. They reached the secondary core, where the cooling system had collapsed. The heat was almost unbearable. The digital displays were flashing red. None of the officers knew what to do. The manuals offered no solutions for this scenario, only one contingency that had never been used: the Zeta 7 protocol. Alice typed the sequence without hesitation. An ancient code, lost among forgotten pages of emergency manuals. The system requested manual authentication. To do so, She would have to descend to the core's lower chamber, a difficult-to-access area, extremely hot, dark, and unstable. No one volunteered. She went. She climbed the hatch barehanded, slipping on wires and oil. She descended alone through a narrow, unventilated tunnel with only the flashlight strapped to her shoulder. Each step brought her closer to danger. But she knew every inch of the system. She knew what to do. Downstairs, he manually reconnected the ventilation ducts, redirected the airflow, reconnected the secondary power cables, and stabilized the pressure control valves. All this with cuts on his hands, his eyes burning with heat, his lungs screaming from the thin air. The control room panel began to react 27 minutes after the initial collapse. The warning light changed color. The main system rebooted. The previously unstable core now displayed acceptable levels. Silence fell over the base. The alarms ceased. The sergeants looked at each other in shock, and then the sound of the hatch opening brought everyone back to reality. Alice emerged covered in dirt, her hair wet with sweat, her lips parched, her uniform torn in places, and her hands scarred with burns. But she was standing, eyes fixed, breathing steadily. The commander walked toward her, still speechless. The other soldiers formed an involuntary corridor, parting as if something sacred were crossing the room. She simply looked around, checked the status panel, and said, "Close the outer doors now. There's still a risk of pressure collapse outside." Then she turned to head back to the technical area, as if nothing had happened. No one moved for a few seconds. The woman who, until days ago, had been the butt of jokes, had saved the entire base, without authorization, without recognition. Only with knowledge, discipline, and courage. Those same qualities that were ignored when she arrived with her brand-new uniform and serene gaze. None of those present forgot what they saw that night. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't demand respect. She simply did what needed to be done, because while others waited for orders, she became the leader the base lacked. What about you? Have you ever seen someone who was ignored step up and show their true worth when no one else knew what to do? Share your thoughts on this unexpected turn of events in the comments. Would you have followed Alice? Which part of the story touched you most? If you enjoyed this story, like the video, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. The next chapter will reveal what was hidden in the base's oldest tunnels and why Alice never fully trusted the commander from the beginning. The silence that followed the alarm was nearly deafening. After hours of screams, muffled explosions, and desperate voices over the radio, the cessation of sound seemed impossible to assimilate. It was as if time had held its breath. The radiation had finally been contained. The core stabilized. The valves sealed. The corridors, previously filled with smoke and panic, now heard only the sound of metal cooling, creaking under the temperature change, as if it too were trying to comprehend what had just happened. The evacuation had been partial. The base was injured, but standing. Many were carried away on stretchers, others staggered from exhaustion, but all were alive. When the helicopter landed on the frozen plateau, its blades cutting through the thin dawn mist, the wind that blew felt like a breath of relief, but also of shame. Because in the midst of that crowd of survivors, there was a figure walking alone, without anyone yet knowing how to face her. Alice was covered in dried blood, radioactive dust, and frozen sweat. Her eyes, however, were clear, fixed, determined. She wasn't seeking applause. She wasn't seeking excuses. She simply walked with her shoulders straight, with the dignity of someone who knew what she'd done, even if everyone else had doubted her until the last second. The captain stepped out of the aircraft. His steps were hesitant. He seemed smaller now, not because of his height, but because of the guilt he carried like a crushing weight. The man who had previously mocked the presence of a woman on the front lines, who had relegated her to mechanical duties with no tactical value, now saw himself facing the same person, but through different eyes. He stopped in front of her, swallowed hard, took off his gloves with trembling hands and murmured, his voice breaking, "You saved us all." She didn't hesitate. She didn't smile. She just looked up and answered, with the same coolness that had saved her so many times in the cold. "I only did what I was trained to do. Being invisible didn't stop me from seeing what no one else saw." The words hung in the air like the final shockwave of a contained explosion. Around her, the other soldiers watched, some silent, others with their eyes downcast, unable to face the contempt they had once held. She had become something none of them could ignore. As the injured were loaded into helicopters, as the wreckage still trembled under the weight of the polar night, Alice walked to the edge of the ice shelf. There, where the world seemed to end and the wind carried ancient laments, she closed her eyes for a moment and remembered every joke, every look of disdain. Every night she spent studying maps, listening to technical whispers between steel walls, collecting fragments of knowledge that would be ignored by everyone, until the moment they would save lives. One of the soldiers, Novak, approached her. His eyes were red, but there was a different glint in them now. Respect. He said nothing. He just draped a thermal blanket over her shoulders and stood there beside her, silent. The sky over Antarctica was beginning to lighten slightly, revealing bluish hues against the endless white. What had almost been the end now became the beginning of something irreversible. Memory. Because on that day, no one would forget that it was she, the ignored, mocked, invisible soldier, who held everyone's fate in her hands with burned hands and solitary decisions. Engineers noted what had gone wrong. Superiors tried to justify failures. But through it all she remained standing, neither seeking credit nor demanding recognition, just steadfast. Because some victories don't need medals, they just need to be seen by the right eyes. And then, as the helicopter engines roared again and the base began to be temporarily abandoned, everyone turned for one last look. There she was, standing alone in the snow. And for a moment, perhaps the first since it all began, no one saw her as a woman on a mission. Only as the person who had saved the entire base. The following week, the winds at Ulysses containment station seemed calmer, but perhaps it was just the emotional climate beginning to shift. The radiation had been controlled. The chaos had ceased. Evacuation helicopters had carried away the injured and the most shaken, but one figure remained steadfast, walking the corridors as if nothing had changed. Alice Duarte. With the incident still fresh, the base became the focus of public attention. Reporters began to gather outside the security zone. Cameras were on, microphones extended, questions fired like gunshots. They wanted the story of the woman who saved the base. They wanted headlines. But Alice refused interviews. He avoided the main corridors when he knew someone from the press was milling about. He didn't want to become a face of heroism. He simply wanted to return to the silence that was natural to him. Inside the base, however, something had changed definitively. Those who had previously whispered when she passed now rose in silence. The mess hall, previously marked by laughter and teasing, was now filled with a restrained respect. No one said anything, but the looks spoke volumes. One of the soldiers who had previously ridiculed her for cleaning external sensors pulled out a chair for her to sit in. Another, who had previously said that a woman wouldn't last a week in this ice, apologized with his eyes, lacking the courage to say it. The chief engineer, who disappeared at the height of the crisis, sought her out in the maintenance department. He carried the weight of omission and shame on his shoulders. He said, almost in a whisper, "I failed the base, but I failed you even more." She didn't answer. She just nodded. She had learned that silence sometimes weighs more heavily than any speech. The commander, in turn, personally drafted a report to the High Command, requesting that Alice be awarded the Service Honor Medal. In the document, he wrote, "If there's anyone who prevented this station from becoming an ice graveyard, it was Lieutenant Duarte. Without her, there would have been no evacuation, no containment, no survival." But when she learned of the recommendation, Alice refused any public ceremony. She didn't want applause, she just wanted to be heard the next time she raised an alarm about something important. On a particularly cold morning, Alice sat outside the base holding a mug of coffee, gazing at the dark Antarctic sky. It was a moment all her own. Her uniform still marked by the burns from the incident, her hands calloused, her breathing slow. No cameras, no tributes, just her, the wind and the silence. The same silence that had once oppressed her was now her ally. Novak, the only one who had respected her from the beginning, approached silently and handed her a new copy of the base's blueprint. She recognized the lines, but noticed something new, redrawn routes based on the information she had uncovered. In the bottom corner of the map, a handwritten caption read, "Alice Protocol." Her mouth didn't smile, but her eyes showed gratitude. Novak sat beside her and simply said, "Now they know." She replied simply, "The important thing is not to remember me. It's to remember the tunnels before it's too late again." In the base control center, the recognition wall had been modified. Next to the portraits of the most decorated officers, there was now a photo of her, covered in soot, holding the base blueprint during the evacuation. Below the image, a simple caption. She saw what no one wanted to see. Days later, the commander knocked on the door of Alice's quarters. He wasn't wearing a uniform. He carried only a small wooden box. As he handed it to her, he said, "It's not for your bravery. It's for the warning you tried to give and no one listened. It's for the silence you endured." She took the box, placed it on the table, and didn't open it. She continued writing in her diary, as she had since day one. Words that no one read, but which carried the weight of everything she had endured in silence. The base's routine returned to normal, but the atmosphere was different. Tactical training now considered the scenarios she had studied. Protocols were updated, and newcomers, upon arriving, were instructed to listen to Alice, even if it seemed exaggerated. What had once been a source of jokes was now a survival guideline. She continued walking the corridors with the same demeanor as always. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't demand anything. She simply acted. She checked the ventilation systems, re-evaluated the sensors, updated the emergency panels. All without fanfare. The respect that had once been denied her now preceded her. Alice never wanted trophies. She never wanted to be a newspaper celebrity. What she wanted was simple: to be taken seriously when she spoke, to be included in decisions, to have a voice before catastrophe. And now, even if the outside world wanted to make her a legend, she preferred to remain as she always was, attentive, present, invisible when necessary, but impossible to ignore again. The eyes that had once judged her now sought her out, and when she entered a room, everyone fell silent, because now everyone could see. The hangar, now silent, carried the weight of the previous days like a contained echo between time-stained metal structures. The moisture from the condensation still dripped down the walls and concrete floor, and the smell of smoke mixed with the cold air made the space dense, almost sacred. Alice walked alone, her steps firm and precise among dented boxes, damaged equipment, and hastily abandoned tools. Her hands, visibly calloused, held her scratched helmet. She propped it on a makeshift bench and sat down, without saying a word. She began to clean her equipment piece by piece, with almost ceremonial movements, as if restoring those tools to their dignity. The base was saved, but most didn't even know how, and the few who did were still trying to understand. She didn't ask for recognition, nor did she seek stares. She simply did what was necessary at the right time with the precision of someone who had trained 1,000 times for a moment that might never arrive. Now that it had arrived, she only wanted silence. And perhaps deep down even that wasn't necessary anymore. The roar of engines breaks the stillness of the atmosphere. A new team of soldiers arrives at the base. They are young, strong, carefree, with the typical look of those who have not yet faced the weight of the unexpected. They bring boxes, laughter, and fresh energy. One of them, as he enters the hangar, looks around with a mixture of curiosity and reverence. He comments loud enough to be heard, but with no intention of starting a conversation. "I heard it was a woman who saved this base, who did what even the commander couldn't. I wonder if she's still around." Alice doesn't respond. She doesn't look up. She just continues wiping the cloth over the oxygen mask, now clean as if polishing a memory only she knew. Her gestures are calm, firm, and the atmosphere seems to shift around her. An invisible mist of respect begins to form, even without the newcomers consciously noticing. Another soldier, a little more attentive, looks in her direction and whispers to his colleague, "I think that's her, the one from the story, the one who stayed when everyone fled." The tone changes. The laughter ceases. The volume of conversations diminishes, as if the space has suddenly transformed. No one approaches. No one interrupts her. This wasn't a scene for photos, nor for medals. It was a real moment of presence and purpose. Alice finishes assembling her backpack. She adjusts the straps. She puts away the repaired radio, checks the cables and sensors. Everything is in order, as if she's preparing for another mission, even if it never comes. What she's experienced has already shaped her, and even if no one repeats it, she'll always be ready. At the back of the hangar, a sergeant passes by, gives a light applause with his fingertips, and disappears around the corner. He says nothing, but his eyes say it all. Gratitude, admiration, regret for not having believed sooner. And she, as always, doesn't respond. Because Alice understood from the beginning that true acts don't need an audience. They endure, in the structure saved, in the lives protected, in the systems that work because someone refused to abandon them. Rumors are already circulating through the base's corridors. Some say a confidential report has been sent to High Command, detailing the emergency protocol she activated. Others talk about a possible promotion or even a special decoration for bravery. But none of this has reached Alice. And if it did, she might refuse. She walks to the side of the hangar, picks up a box of old tools and a folded map. The same map she studied alone in the wee hours of the morning when no one wanted to listen. She rolls it up carefully and places it in the compartment of her backpack. Then, for a brief moment, she stops. She observes the emptiness of the hangar, the distant echo of voices, the smell of cold metal, and takes a deep breath. Perhaps others are still trying to understand what happened. They may never know for sure, but she knows. He knows about the alarm that went off at 2:47 a.m. He knows about the thermal containment tunnel that no one remembered. You know about the emergency protocol that saved the base core. You know about the burns, the blood, the decisions. And that's enough. As she leaves, she passes a young recruit who looks at her curiously. He doesn't know who she is, but he senses something different. She simply nods slightly and continues on, because the path of those who carry the truth is not always recognized, but it is always necessary. The base now lives a new routine, with more caution, with more silence. Many still tell stories, create myths, exaggerate details, but those who are actually there simply respect. And among all the names mentioned, there is one that is rarely spoken aloud, perhaps for fear of not living up to what it represents. Perhaps because deep down, everyone understands that true value doesn't need to be announced. Alice returns to her station, turns on the panel, adjusts the sensors. The work continues. How many times have you been overlooked because of your gender, appearance, or position, until you were the only one who knew exactly what to do? Have you ever experienced or witnessed something like this? Leave a comment below and share your experience. If this story touched you in any way, click like and subscribe to the channel. The next episode is already in production and promises to give you even more chills. Hit the bell so you don't miss it.